I'm Nicole Shanahan, Bobby Kennedy's running mate. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. You have these family dairy farmers that are just throwing up their hands and they're like, we're out.
It's just a small group of extreme environmentalists that sue nonstop.
I meet these young people who they dream of this life.
There's no guarantee you'll be successful, but you're entitled to enter the race.
You destroy the land, you destroy your business.
Mm-hmm. The consumption of beef has been dropping since 1980.
I mean, part of what I think we're trying to do with this campaign is helping young people reframe courage.
We just love what we're doing, so we just encourage young people. If you want to get involved in agriculture, go get involved in agriculture.
You know, our audience right now it's a lot of Bobby Kennedy supporters, but they're coming from anti-big pharma. That's our largest support base. Anti-big ag, that's our second large support base. And then a whole medical movement around food as medicine. A lot of families with kids who have been negatively impacted, who have chronic disease, which is unfortunately more than half of the United States. So
yeah, 60%.
All good company. Yeah, more than half of kids have some known diagnosis. I'm sadly in that category of people. My daughter has an autism diagnosis, so that's what put me on this journey. That's how I found Bobby.
We shared with Zach a little bit too. I didn't know a heck of a lot about the health benefits of beef. I mean, I've ranched my entire life. Then we get in the beef business 3 years ago, and then I learned about the nutrition of beef. And when I first started, both my grandparents one had a four bypass heart surgery, the other one had 5. And it was just a matter of time I was going to have mine. And my one grandfather had diabetes. My brother has diabetes. So it was a matter of time I didn't know. The only thing I knew about beef was I loved it. It was great. And I beat the odds by drinking red wine when I had beef because that was supposed to be good. But I didn't know. I actually believed as a lifelong rancher that fat caused heart disease and fat caused plaque in the arteries and fat caused high LDL, and it was bad for you. And then 3 years ago, I got involved and just started searching because there's so much. People started coming up and going, geez, does your beef have antibiotics? Does your beef have hormones? Does your beef, it's chock full, if it's bought in a grocery store, it's chock full of glyphosate. And I didn't know. I was like, oh my gosh, if I'm part of this is not good. So we just started researching and found out that it was all a lie. And I came across a podcast. Have you heard of Nina Teicholz?
No.
So she was a vegan for 25 years, investigative journalist, and she got assigned to trans fat. She was working for Gourmet magazine. So, and her story, to hear her tell it, is pretty interesting because she said, and 10 years later, I wrote this book, The Big Fat Surprise. Mm-hmm. Well, she learned in 1954, actually, in 1911, there wasn't a recorded case of heart disease in America.
1911, there was no heart disease?
Not one. Yeah. 1912 was the first one. Mm-hmm. 1911, Procter & Gamble decided that cottonseed oil that was only used for machines like oil, regular motor oil, they whipped it up and made Crisco out of it. So then the heart disease rate in America just started going through the roof. 1955, Eisenhower has his heart attack, and the whole country was in full panic mode. And so a guy named Ansel Keys at University of Minnesota comes up with the heart health hypothesis. And he studied 7 countries all over the world that the higher the intake of saturated fat was, your increase of heart disease went up. I mean, it was a perfect 45-degree line. Never put it out for peer review. It was never reviewed by anybody. It was just a hypothesis. So he takes it to the American Heart Association. Of course, they blessed it and said, this is fantastic. They have a lottery every year. They gave the American Heart Procter & Gamble, who came up with Crisco, gives them $1 million, and it was over. 1961, they come out with their first dietary guidelines and recommended removing saturated fat from animals in your diet. Well, then they released the full data. There was 22 countries in that study, and the dots were everywhere. There was zero correlation to saturated fat and heart disease.
That's really bad statistics. So our entire war on saturated fat in this country, which has dominated diet literature and dominated the healthcare advice that we get from our doctors, has been wrong. We're just figuring that out. And for a long time, veganism was being pitched as such a healthy diet for people. And I had many friends on these vegan diets, and their teeth were starting to rot. And they were having really serious health issues, GI issues, concentration issues, fibromyalgia. So cutting out meat is not necessarily, it's not right. And a lot of people are realizing that. I'd love to hear about your journey. You guys have one of the best operations in the United States out of Montana right now. You're a bull breeder, and you also have been on your own journey and trying to figure out this intersection between raising cattle and managing the land. Are you first generation?
Pretty much, because we started from scratch. I mean, our parents ranched and owned a feedlot in Montana. My grandparents came from Ohio, farmer feeder. Marcia's grandparents homesteaded in eastern Montana in Lindsay, but there was no family money, so we got generational knowledge, but we just really wanted to ranch, and so we just did it. I borrowed my first $400 when I was 10, 1978, and bought a cow.
Really?
And I've been in the cow business ever since.
You were 10 years old?
Yeah.
That's an incredible story. Do you remember?
We kind of call ourselves, we did gypsies, because our cows, we had no land. And land is pretty much impossible to buy unless you're an absentee owner anymore. It's so expensive. And the amount of land you have to have in Montana in these arid places. So our cows we leased, rented anything we could, and just gypsied them around.
We'd load up the kids and load up the cows and go fix
kids.
fence and take them to a brand new place in southwestern Montana.
Oh my God, I love that story.
So we just have bought our ranch 5 years. We've had our first, we have headquarters at least for our cows. So
I meet these young people who they dream of this life of going into farming or ranching. But that first step is really hard for people. And there's a lot of fear around, well, what if I don't do it right? How did you have a mentor? How did you know what kind of cow you wanted to buy, or what did you where were you learning all of this information on how to do it?
I don't know. I had lots of mentors. I've had lots of mentors my whole life, but I would say every one of them, especially our parents. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and in agriculture, it's funny. It's not funny, but I was paying 16% interest when I was 13. And our
16% interest when you were 13.
Because I wasn't going to give up my cows. That was my mentor. Was as young, probably as a 5-year-old kid. I didn't care what color they were. I didn't care anything about it. I was going to have I loved everything about them. Their ears, their shape, the whole thing. Feeding them, cleaning up after them, and every mentor I had was, get out of here, go away. Go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, go make money, get out of here. You're never going to make it.
That's a tough message to get as a young person whose passion is to become a rancher, but you persevered.
Well, you do. If you like doing something, we live in a free country.
Yeah.
So, I grew up listening to that too, is you live in a free country. There's no guarantee you'll be successful, but you're entitled to enter the race. And so if you just sit back and look at the risk, which today, most entrepreneurs, you've heard the term smart money. You got to make 30%. You got to make 30% on your money. And there's no 30% on your money in ranching. There isn't. The government controls a lot of things. You know, there's a lot of environmental laws that really prohibit ranching from extreme environmentalists. And the saturated fat thing. The saturated fat thing has debilitated the ranching industry. When I got to be a young adult, I had my first bull sale in 1991, and over half of my customers, at least half of my customers, had 100 head of cows or less. And they had sheep and they had crops. And within 10 years, they were gone. And so,
Wow.
and then 5 years later, the people that had 250 head were gone. And then the people that kept their 250 or 300 head, the kids were gone, the wife was working in town, they had no hired help. I mean, it was a challenge. And now that number is up to 1,000 head ranches. Even up to that number, there's at least 2 or 3 family members working in town or somewhere else, because the consumption of beef has been dropping since 1980. And Bobby talks about the dramatic rise in autoimmune diseases, autism and stuff in 89. Well, there's kind of a slowing down period in that. When your body's not healthy, you don't respond to vaccines the right way. And today we're looking at 60% chronic illness. Medicaid and Medicare are 5 times our military budget. Our national debt is probably $36 trillion today. It's already passed, how high that is. And I honestly say a huge part of that, especially the illness in America, is the lack of saturated fat.
Every cell in our body relies on cholesterol to operate and function properly.
And when you got big business saying, don't eat that. I mean, right now you got the pharmaceutical and you got the American Heart Association, Cancer Association, Alzheimer's, and diabetes do not exist without a huge population of sick people.
Yep.
The donors quit paying in there. There's zero money in healthy people. And so I look at that, and I've watched my entire industry shrink around us. How are we going to survive? We got into the registered business, and we learned you've got to have a quality product, work hard in a quality product. And so we have been chugging for a long time. And learning about that, we're just trying to give back to our customers. How do we help people survive?
Yeah.
We've done everything we can. And now we're getting into the meat business to get through the big packers and the big feeders, because we kept hitting the glass ceiling. And so that's why the only reason we're in the meat business is to help our customers survive. That's it.
Interesting. So let me understand your business a little bit better. So you started ranching, leasing land, and those cows that you would raise would be sold, or?
I've been in every aspect of the ranching. So I've run yearlings, commercial cows. When you say registered cows and commercial cows, so registered breeders are also called the seed stock. That's what we are.
Got it.
So we sell the bulls, and we keep track of all the numbers, the genetics. This bull will do this. We keep track of about 17 traits. And then ranchers can come to us and pick from those traits. They raise the cattle that go into the beef supply system. And so, we leased ranches for 30 years and had just about given up on ever having our own. And we changed our thinking in 2011, decided we could. And then here's where the curve comes in. We got into the vodka business, and through the vodka business, we got into the cigar business. And it wasn't because we wanted to get into the vodka business or the cigar business. We liked those two things, but we wanted to own our own ranch. And we just kept believing that someday we would. And you live in a free country and you go for it. So we borrowed more money and we took that risk. And for the first time as a rancher, ranchers sit on our side of the fence, and we decide what you guys are thinking and talk about. People want this, and the consumer wants this, and here's what the feeders are doing, and here's what the big packers are doing. And they can get into a victim mentality. And we were never okay with that. It's like, okay, if that's the issue, then how do we solve it? Well, through our vodka business and our cigar business, we met the consumer for the first time and started hearing all these questions. what about this? What about this? And they were like, a lot of people, when we did a vodka show or a cigar show, they thought I was just the mascot, that I was just dressed up. And then when they met us and found out, geez, you're an actual real rancher, we'd send some beef samples from the ranch. They're like, you have got to get in the beef business.
Yeah.
This stuff's fantastic. And so then we learned. We heard from the consumer for the first time, and then our minds started opening up. Then we learned about the health benefits. Then we learned about glyphosate and hormones and antibiotics. And you hear all this stuff that you have to be a small organic rancher and it has to be grass-fed to be healthy, and the stuff in the feedlot is not healthy. And that's a false narrative within our own industry, just out of desperation to protect their own family ranch. None of that's true. We test our own meat. I had to test it to find out, if we were selling meat that was full of glyphosate, we would have quit. If there was still antibiotic residue in meat, we wouldn't want to be part of that. But there's lots of good layers in there. And the most scrutiny in the industry is the huge feedlots, the huge packers get the most scrutiny. And they're pretty, the reason we have big feedlots and big packers, in my opinion, is because of the extreme environmental restrictions we've had and saturated fat. Those two items, and because all the little guys went away, those huge industries are just a symptom of the problem.
Well, you see that trend in dairy as well, where it's crippling, like the regulation has become so crippling on the small and medium-sized dairy farmer that it's impossible to dig out of debt, that the regulations seem to be piling on year after year. The filings, the certification, the requirements for oversight, the inspections. It seems like it's gotten to the point where you have these family dairy farmers that are just throwing up their hands and they're like, we're out.
It's true.
And it sounds like the same has happened over the last few decades with cattle and meat produce as well.
The regulations are so daunting and the risk is so high. Most people it's overwhelming to have to even start to deal with the paperwork. And some of the letters that we have gotten have been so incredibly rude. It's like you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent almost. And the government is there to serve. It's not there to be a police for anybody, in my opinion. That wasn't what our country started up to be. And so when you get these letters of you better do this or this or this, or basically you're going to get thrown in jail. It's a overwhelming fear thing when you're working so hard to provide a business and be a blessing for your your consumers, and then you get treated that way. I don't like it.
So let's talk about some of these regulations that you've seen recently. And first and foremost, the tone and the relationship with the government. Sounds like the tone is way off in how the government is relating to these businesses. So that's got to get fixed. But tell me about the nature of the regulation that a small, mid-sized farmer is up against today.
Well, the ones that are left, if we talk about let's just say in the Western United States, what's really heartbeat with us, just as important as the saturated fat, is the reduction in AUM. So an AUM is an animal unit per month. And so on public ground, you can run, if you have a BLM lease that's 300 AUMs, you can run 300 cows for a month. Or you can run 100 cows for 3 months. You kind of break it up that way. In the mid-'80s, when all the endangered species started, there was a list of them. And the cow numbers would get reduced to save the species. And so there was no people to cut the trails. There was no people to maintain the fences. And then logging, obviously, as well. People stopped, it was almost, it became impossible. I mean, logging virtually ended in the 80s. When I grew up, there was logging roads all over, and the wildlife were clear up on the top of the mountains. They were in those areas and running back and forth. And then as it started to slow down, the animals started coming down because, we're not managing trees anymore. And lots of deadfall, and so the animals can't even get away from predators up there. We had the Fish and Game tell us on a tour 6-7 years ago, the elk and deer don't want to go back up there. It's just they can't get away when predators are coming in. So they come down in on the ranches with the cows. I mean, if you want to find wildlife, go find a cow because they're right there. There's kind of a natural thing with them. And now, protecting, one concern I had on the website, when I first go to the website, is Bobby says we're ending all logging on public ground. And to me, it's like, to gain any Republican support or anybody outside of the, real extreme environmental people, that's a non-starter because we haven't been logging for 40 years, virtually.
Right.
And in Montana, if you go even right up where we are, the deadfall's so bad, and then there's beetle kill up there, and so you have hundreds of thousands of acres with dead trees in them. And then a lightning storm comes around, and then we have an industry that's no different than the pharmaceutical or Medicare. We have a firefighting industry, and I don't know what that budget is, but it's like $1 billion a year. It might be $2 billion now. They set up camp, spend all this money, and nobody does anything about the fire. If there's no structures in there, they just let it burn. So it's like nobody really cares about the trees anyway. They're going to let them burn and die anyway. And so why not manage it? What are you going to replace them with? The wildlife kind of go back. There's an ebb and flow. They can't come down out of the hills anymore because there's civilization. We've kind of robbed them of that with fences and houses and roads and stuff. And then we've kind of robbed them of a good spot up there. The Indians used to burn all the time, and
Controlled
they would just
burns,
controlled burns, and they weren't hot and devastating like today. When those big fires go through, it's decades to even start over.
Well, I was in California during the big fires a few years ago, and it was one of the most dystopian experiences I've ever had in my life.
Bad.
People got really sick during that time. You couldn't go outside. The sky was blacked out. There was soot falling from the sky, and it felt like you couldn't escape it. And like you said,
it goes for decades.
Yeah.
Because everything's sterilized so bad. That land will sit there for 25 years before it can even begin to start regrowth.
And so the question really is, it's like, why haven't we been able to strike a balance between the wisdom of the outdoors industries, right? Because there's generational wisdom there. The logging industry, there's been generational wisdom there. And the small, mid-sized businessman doesn't want to destroy the land, because you destroy the land, you destroy your business. So the incentives, without any regulation alone, really do align between the small rancher or the small logger and good environmental policy.
So it's there. There's actually good environmental policy within the BLM and the Forest Service. It's just a small group of extreme environmentalists that sue nonstop. They get donors. I mean, they're big donors. They've probably never been in the forest, because they wouldn't if they understood the wisdom of it. And no matter what, they sue grazing allotments, they sue logging projects. And when I worked with the secretaries in the Trump administration, these agencies, the heads of them just got tired of the lawsuits, and they're like, okay, we're just going to lower our risk of getting sued and see if we can fly under the radar and have these environmental groups leave us alone. Well, what that means is we're just going to reduce ag until these guys leave us alone, and they're not going to leave us alone. The real hardcore guys, they want ag completely out of public ground. They do not want to see a cow anywhere. They want it to go back to nature, and we're sitting here out on the ground taking care of it. Like you said, we have to have it next year. We have to have it next year. and they want it all natural. You know, my uncle said to me 20 years ago, he goes, well, all the people that want everything to go back to nature should get on a boat and go back to Europe, because that's how far we got to go to get it back to nature. And so we have to find a balance in there. We've got to find, and there's a lot of bureaucrats in these offices.
Well, and maybe the issue shouldn't be so binary between whether or not it should be allowed on BLM land or not. Maybe it's a combination of understanding rotational grazing on BLM land a little bit better, because when I've been on grasslands with like really strong rotational grazing practices, they're some of the most beautiful landscapes I've ever seen. In Northern California, Alexander Family Farm, for instance, has restored entire natural habitats. Rivers, streams have come in. They've had now deer return. They've had different bird species come back in. The soil is as healthy as it's ever been. So in your experience trying to intersect between government and industry, did you ever see individuals out there who were really making the pitch for, you know, it's not just hide, it's not just make ag small until the environmentalists go away. Don't capitulate. Bring forward better science, right? Bring forward the winning science, because environmentalists are looking at the available science. And what I've noticed in the world of science is that you only get the science funded by certain special interest groups, and that then dominates policy.
Right.
But if we had good scientists coming in and rebutting with rotational grazing practices as like the number one way
to
fight climate change.
We have that.
You do?
It's been there. But these groups tie it up in court for decades and decades and decades. And you bleed out. Agriculture runs out of money a heck of a lot quicker than hedge fund guys that are donating to the Sierra Club. And that's what happens. They just tie it up in court. Where, I mean, there's grazing associations and Forest Service allotments that have just been sitting there. They can't move forward, and you don't have any money. You run out of money to do it, and then there's another one gone. And
I think some of like our personal frustration with our BLM allotment is we've come up with ideas of, okay, let's utilize this. Let's do the intense grazing. We've got to get some fencing here to work with that. And our BLM guy has been awesome, but the bureaucracy behind him to just make that baby step and go, okay, let's do this. It goes through years and years. So you can't go forward. And that's what I think probably our big complaint is. Yeah, he has
shared that
said
this
that.
morning.
His
So he
hands
goes,
are
I've just
tied.
given up. He goes, I tell people, this is a great plan. This is a positive thing. We're going to make the land better. We're going to make everything better. And 5 years later, it's still dead.
It hasn't moved because it's gotten lost on somebody's desk.
Yeah.
And it just too much of that is going on.
I fully agree. And if you think about the role of government, their only responsibility is to transact money in and transact money out. And right now, it's like a lot of transacting's going in, and then what's coming out is layers of bureaucracy and regulation and a bunch of nonsense.
So you just nailed something. You take the rulemaking, they're not allowed to make rules, these bureaucracies. But they've been doing it for so long. It's no different than Fauci and COVID and shutting the entire country down, 3.3 million jobs. They get the expert there that says, here's a new rule. The EPA is not allowed to write rules. Congress is. And the Taylor Grazing Act, which started the BLM, and the Forest Service is tied to use. This is, I mean, that's how they settled the West, is you've got to use this stuff. And now it's, okay, it's pretty, let's not use it anymore. And just driving down here, all the ag land that's getting plowed under. I mean, the cost of food is, people think the cost of food's high now. It's not even what it costs to produce food yet.
Wow. We have 900 million acres of agricultural land in this country. And the fact that people are complaining about how expensive it is to buy meat. There was recently an article that came out, and there was a grocery store that was selling meat wrapped up in locks. And you had to go to the counter to get the meat unlocked because
really?
people were stealing the meat.
Oh, geez.
It's gotten to the point where we are in a country that is on a suicidal path, because the most basic needs like meat and clean food and water and housing are not being met by our government, who has the largest budget on the planet of any government, of any country.
So think about that. That idea of people going and stealing food and the complaint today of how expensive food is came in with FDR. We went through the 30s, we went through the Depression, and people couldn't get food. And so then, and Bobby just said it on the last deal, or no, it wasn't Bobby, we were at Paul Harvey. That came in on that. Those programs have stayed. And the cheap food program came in. The government instituted a cheap food program, and food is going to be cheap and it's going to be good and healthy. And so those are two opposite things that can't happen, because good food is not cheap. And we all know that, because so industry rises up and said, okay, if food's cheap, we got to make processed food. And that's where the processed food comes from. And people have been told for 70 years, American food is cheap. And it's not. And so that mindset of, like you said, the suicide path, people are complaining about the price of meat. Meat should be like we sell a mix of liver, heart, and hamburger in a grocery store, and it sells for $5.99 a pound. People are complaining about how expensive it is. It should be $70 a pound. It's so healthy for the body. It's so good for you. But people have been conditioned. It's really expensive. And it's interesting, you said there's a target on cows. Beef is the only thing people complain about food, you know?
Well, and let's look at the economics again. If there were more small and mid-sized farmers across the United States and less regulatory hurdles, supply would necessarily go up, especially the good supply would go up, right?
It would be a challenge because that supply, that infrastructure has been wiped out. Like I said, coming down here, how many places, how many old packing houses and little feedlots and stuff are gone? They're under houses now. So trying to restructure that infrastructure and remember, like everything else, these huge industries, there's a lot of efficiencies there. Mm-hmm. It's going to cost, food's actually going to cost more. We talk about that, smaller things like that, but they don't have the efficiencies. I mean, we're more efficient to haul a semi-load of cattle to a packing house than we are to haul 2 steers down to our local butcher if we get into the carbon footprint. And so those challenges are there going, okay, where do we go back to? How far back do we go? And your workforce.
But I do think it's still, I think what you're presenting is very healthy, because there is something about working for yourself, connecting with nature, connecting with animals that we as a group of people have lost anymore. And there's something so healthy about working around nature and animals, in my opinion.
Well,
I do. I think, and if there is people that are actually interested in doing that, and there is a whole new homesteading kind of popular thing kind of now going on, I think it's good. I don't know how to jump that creek to get over there, because that's a lot of work, and we, I think, as a society have gotten pretty lazy. We like our little check once a week and watch social media or the TV for 6-10 hours a day or whatever the average person is doing. And if you're actually going to have a business or you're actually going to have a little farm, you can't do that. You got to get out and...
Well, you look at your pay stub. If you're doing your own business like we run our own business, you're looking at a net $1.83 an hour. People are not going to look at that and go, forget this. I can get a tech job and work 2 hours and make $30 an hour. Why in the world? But it is. There's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge of getting back to that.
I'm sitting across from two very healthy looking people that, my sense is that you love what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't trade it in for a desk job.
No.
So let's unpack why that is. Why do you love doing this? If you were talking to a young person today who dreams of the ranching life but can't afford it, you're a model of a lifetime of dedication leading to something truly deeply rewarding and living a true dream out. Part of what I think we're trying to do with this campaign is helping young people reframe courage and reframe that I can do this and it's going to be amazing on the other side if I just keep at it. My peers who have spent their entire lives in front of computers, they're really not well. I know so many of my closest girlfriends who might not ever become moms because, they've just, one thing or another happened. They feel like they just can't, or some of them aren't well enough to. And I would say almost all of the women in this population have spent hundreds of thousands of hours of their adult lives inside in front of a computer working. So there's these trade-offs that you have to be ready to make in life. And I feel like we're a country with all this farmland and all of this need. We need people to go out there and be brave enough to ranch and to create these small, medium-sized businesses. How do we inspire them to do that?
So there's a college in our town, and we host a few. They bring tour groups up every once in a while just to learn. At the end of every session is that question: what do you say to the young person who wants to go? And I always tell them, go and do what you want to do, no matter what. Don't worry about, because the outside world, like I said, all my mentors said, don't do this. You're crazy. But if you love doing that, you will get there. The path will be curvy, but doors will open up along the way. And it's far more important to your health, your mental health, your physical health, to do what you love doing, no matter how broke you are or how hard it is, than to go put yourself in a trade in your freedom for safety, for your health insurance and your retirement. And you become a weekend warrior and you go sit with your friends and tell them how you hate your job, but it pays the bills. And we don't have those conversations because we just love what we're doing. So we just encourage young people, if you want to get involved in agriculture, go get involved in agriculture, and don't ask for a freebie. Don't ask for, I need a mentor to help me. Don't ask for that. You'll never make it. If you're looking for a free deal, you just have to go for it. Go work for somebody, learn. And then
I do think the regulation thing, that would be my number one thing, is lighten the regulations in our country for opening up any kind of business. And I just think it's very overwhelming for most young people to step out and take that risk. And it's exciting. I don't know if you remember the guy in Missoula. We drove up and got coffee.
The guy you talked to the other day?
No, this was a couple years ago. It was during COVID. And when everybody's hiding in their houses. And he was out, he had started a little coffee business, and he had a breakfast burrito, and I think it took 15 minutes to cook it. But he was so excited because it was his business. And he's like, I hope I can make it. I just think if we would, in our country, make it more accessible, more easy to start up businesses, whatever your dream is.
Well, there's
able to go for it.
There's another challenge to ag in that, and that the cost of entry. So in all of agriculture, whether you're ranching or farming, we buy all of our inputs at retail and we sell our production at wholesale. And so talking about saturated fat, talking about environmental regulations and stuff, our state association is starting to talk about giving in and taking a subsidy and just saying, let's just get on an annual subsidy. Everybody else is getting a subsidy. And, you know, they brought up the 3 truck companies, Ford, Chevy, and Dodge, are all subsidized by the government, but we have to pay full retail. The tractor companies, the equipment companies are all subsidized by the government, and we have to pay all that out. And I'm sitting here saying, if we don't change the story on saturated fat, the reason, so the cost of entry, to keep this to the cost of entry, for 40 years of people giving up on agriculture, the price of land is going up because there's fewer and fewer, and there's so much outside money coming into agriculture because there's no money in agriculture. That cost of entry, just buying the land, it's really similar to, Bobby talks about the housing deal. BlackRock and State Street shouldn't own housing. We have hedge fund groups that own feedlots. They're these huge absentee. Rupert Murdoch bought 2 of the biggest ranches in Montana.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the cost of entry. No one can afford to get in there. And then all your expenses, and then what you get paid, because in the ranching deal, it's a free market deal. When the market crashes, it's over, and you borrow money and you hope to live through 10 years. And there's so many people that aren't even paying their operating loans back every year. They're just renewing them. And we're one of them.
Restructuring them.
We're caught in
I've
them.
seen some of the books of these small, medium-sized agriculture businesses, and it becomes a combination of all of these different loans with different timelines, and there's just constant repackaging, restructuring the loans over time. And the government has not only not helped in any way, but it strikes me that the government, through regulation and also through selling out so much farmland to big ag, has neglected its duty to small, medium-sized agricultural groups and businesses and family businesses. It is shocking to me how absent the government has been in looking after its role in protecting both the farmland through close family stewardship and the individuals and the equity ownership. Because what I'm seeing is that it's almost impossible to create true equity ownership through good land management and stewardship. And that, to me, is the most direct way of dealing with our climate crisis, is by rewarding the family businesses who, in their business model, are stewarding the land responsibly. And I've looked at different attempts to get there, even, regenerative agricultural carbon credits, but it's been so anemic and so unhelpful and so indirect. There are these long caveat attempts to financially reward good land stewardship, but none of it's direct. And nobody within the government is taking this on and saying, this is what I'm going to get done.
I keep going back to saturated fat. So the USDA is supposed to protect farming, right?
Yeah.
Supposed to protect land. That is their mission statement. Yet they gave Tufts University $10 million in 2021 to come up with lab-grown meat. What's the carbon footprint of that, and what's that doing for agriculture? And if they have known since 1961 that their saturated fat has never caused an illness since the beginning of man. They have known that, yet there's still a 10% cap on saturated fat in the U.S. dietary guidelines. That alone, if that could have gotten removed in the 80s, our conversation would be so much different today. We would have, maybe those 50 head guys would be gone, but our medium guys, our little packing houses would still be there because people wouldn't be afraid to eat meat. So as far as your cost to entry, your regulations, the USDA capping that and suggesting 6 tablespoons of seed oils We know what that does. Seed oils need to go back, and this saturated fat thing is a challenging thing. If you guys come out and say seed oils are bad for humans, you're going to have the farmers against you, and there's really nothing wrong with seed oils. We need all those grains. That's great, but put the oil back in an engine. Put the oil somewhere where it's useful. Feed those seed oils to a cow, because a ruminant can break it down in their 4 stomachs where people can't. Those things help agriculture without the government funding it. And with this $34 trillion worth of debt, we can't come up with new government programs. We've got to figure out, wait a minute, where's this spending going? So I still tie it, saturated fat, to regulations, to Medicare, Medicaid, the debt, and we really unleash ag.
So if you think that the demand comes back for good, healthy meat, that there will be enough economic incentive to bring back some of these industries?
Absolutely. So what the first thing I would see happening? Monocropping would be reduced, because those people that just raise one crop and they just that's it, and all the things that we give up, the plant diversity, if people start getting healthy, people are going to start raising cows. They'll start putting fences up again. They'll start using that land completely different, and that's not a government program that we're spending more money again. We're just saying, look, we have to reduce our national debt. We've got to reduce Medicare and Medicaid. The science, there are hundreds of tests, and not observational and epidemiological, because those tests mean nothing. Randomized clinical tests on saturated fat proving it improves health. People have recovered from autism, Alzheimer's, strokes, all kinds of diseases on a daily basis.
Well, the B vitamins alone in well-raised meat is incredible.
That's the only source in the world. You can't get it anywhere else.
Yeah. And B vitamins are foundational to so many cellular metabolic functions. And the highest bionutrient availability is in really good meat. And as well, the organ meat. And so it's we're starting to see doctors now coming out and prescribing these carnivore diets for people, which is pretty breakthrough.
Yeah, there's hundreds of doctors now, and they all, I would highly recommend you guys contacting Nina Ty-Schultz, because she, again, was a vegetarian for 25 years. She didn't eat meat because of what the government, everything said. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for your health. She was overweight. And she went back and started eating, and her health changed. And her breakthrough book, The Big Fat Surprise, is where all these doctors and nutritionists across the world all use her as a reference in the amount of work she did to put that together. It took a vegetarian to educate ranchers that fat is good for you.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
A converted vegetarian.
Yeah.
So let's talk about methane.
Great topic.
The thing that we're being sold right now in the world of philanthropy is that cow farts are contributing to global warming.
So what do you think about that? And then I'll share.
I've looked at the data, and in the really compact feedlots where the cows aren't walking around, where they're eating grains and seeds and they're not grazing, they're getting packed full of all kinds of vaccines and antibiotics, that if you look at the methane emitted by a lot of 2,000 of these cows that are raised in a very specific way, the methane rates are non-negligible. It exists. And if you were to take that and assume that all cattle were being raised that way, and that the average diet was that of, the omnivore meat-eating American, theoretically, that could amount to a sizable amount of methane over time. But would that methane lead to the kind of global warming temperatures that they're claiming? No. I don't think that the science is adding up that way. And there's a lot of theoreticals in there that aren't exactly accurate and realistic.
So this is a fabulous topic to talk about. Fabulous, because as a rancher, I've heard for 15 years methane, and as a rancher, all we do is we look at each other and go, how are we going to defend this? This is bad. We don't know anything. Do you know of Dr. Frank Mittliner?
No.
He is the guru on methane. He's a professor at UC Davis. He's a German. He gets paid to measure methane in agriculture and reduce it. So the UN came out with Livestock's Long Shadow in 2006. That was the first door crack to methane. And livestock is responsible for 80% of all emissions in the world. Well, he read it and he said, hey, wait a minute. You're measuring the tailpipe emissions out of a car, and you're measuring everything from the cow, from the rubber that's made on the trucks, the engines, the whole thing, and their emissions. He said, you can't do that. You got to. So then once they measured apples for apples, so of everything that gets measured today for methane and emissions, the lowest thing they measure are cows. It's about approximately 2.6%, which is amazing to me. Everybody wants the target is still on the cow. Going, okay, they're the lowest emission emitter. Let's get rid of them. Again, and cows are carbon neutral, actually, and they're actually a carbon net sink.
Through rotational grazing, there's actually less methane in the poops or than farts, it turns out. And it's more than, they have actually net benefits to soil organic matter through strong rotational grazing. And then if you maintain the grasslands and you count the grasslands as a carbon sink, they're incredibly beneficial.
So
they could save the planet.
According to him, that's just the opposite of the feedlot. So you take a cow, their system is designed to eat this grass. And when they're eating grass and they're just out there eating grass, the emission, the methane, is at its highest output. They put out more emissions out here grazing. Because when you put them in a feedlot and they're only eating about 15% long stem or cellulose, they don't produce near as much methane because their system's not working. And so he's measured that. He has all the data. Because I thought for the same reason too, okay, we put these cows in the feedlot, it's hot, we're feeding them all this other stuff, the methane it's actually less than when you're out here on the pasture. Either way, they are neutral. The only time carbon enters the equation of 2.6% is when we harvest them. That's it. And you got to have a truck. And I say for 2.6% output, if we got to put something out in emissions,
right,
our food should get first shot at it. And that's the lowest thing. It's below chickens. It's below crop production. Cows are the lowest thing out there. 2/3 of the life cycle of a cow is out eating grass. So whether they're in like our cows grow, we have X amount of acres. The cows live on those acres. And most ranchers have to ship those cows off. Here's another thing, the difference between regenerative ag and keeping everything on the ranch.
Yeah.
Everybody would have to cut their herd by 60%. So think about that margin. Instead of running 1,000 cows, now you're running 500 because you're doing it all because that extra grass has to go into that calf. And so when you talk about water and feed resources, take 37% of all crop production that's non-human edible. Ruminants are the only things that can eat that and make use of it. So you send them to a feedlot because that's where you can break it down and feed them. These are amazing machines. And so when they're out on grass, a ruminant is designed to eat coarse roughage. It's cellulose. They're the only thing that can break down cellulose is a ruminant animal. When you send them to a feedlot, about 80% of that diet, and it's just about the last 100 days. The first 5 to 6 months in a feedlot, they're still eating hay and other byproducts. Like when you cut wheat for bread, all that straw goes in, it can be fed to a cow. And so they're still growing this animal up. And then they slowly introduce the corn at the end. So about the last 100 days, they're eating about 80%. And And it's not just corn, it's whatever grain's available to them. The majority of it is corn. But then that rumen slows down because it is designed to really digest cellulose. And this is where Dr. Frank Mittliner comes in. He has measured that. And so he's like, okay, he's all about regenerative ag, and we are too, but to throw these big feedlots under the bus, and we want little ones. We run a 6,000 head feedlot, and we're buying all these byproducts from ranches to feed the cows. But the rumen slows down. They actually put out less emissions, and this, you'd have to look up Dr. Frank Mittliner, UC Davis. He does have the data. The UN takes a lot of instruction from him now because he's very honest and accurate, but that's where we got that information. So that's where it's like, okay, it's not really so simple of this is all bad and this is all good. There's a combination. Take a ranch, let's take a ranch, for instance. Last year, it rained all through the haying season.
Yeah.
So when that happens, you'll end up with some mold in your hay, in almost all of your hay. Well, mold to a pregnant cow, she'll abort her calf. And so it can be pretty dangerous. Well, you can send that hay to a feedlot and they can grind it up. We have a grinder that just breaks all that up and breaks those stems down in there. By the time we feed it, that mold gets dusty and it kind of breaks up and goes away. You lose a lot of it, and then it gets spread out and fed to animals who aren't pregnant. So then you eliminate the waste of that hay that got rained on and got moldy. The rancher can take the money he got from that and go buy some hay that doesn't have mold in it. And so it's a real
symbiotic economy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you talk about nutrient density, you've got way more in a pound of beef than you will like a pound of carrots.
Yeah.
So another thing to keep in mind is how our government has gutted American beef growers by allowing foreign imported beef from like Brazil to come in and be labeled as American grown.
So that's kind of a confusing thing. So everybody thinks that when they see the USDA stamp on it, that's the US flag, and which is kind of it is a little confusing, but all that means is it's been inspected by the USDA and it's safe. That's it. It doesn't mean, they're not saying this is American grown at all. All that stamp says is it's inspected by the USDA and it's safe. Now, where our government has let us down, and we talked about this the other night, is we bring in all that, because we have trading partners, and I understand that, and we do need to trade. You want to have a back and forth, you want to have allies, but the thresholds, let's just take cull cows for an instance. Cull cows today are worth about anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000. That's where they need to be for us just to make payments and pay for our fuel and keep up with things and pay our loans down. When it gets down to cows are worth 60 cents just to the last decade, we're losing money. People are losing serious money, and there should be a threshold there. There should be a window on cows or our imports and exports. When our prices hit this certain spot, the imports stop. And those trade guidelines those safeguards are supposed to be executed, and they're not. They drop way down. So when the price of a cull cow gets down to 90 cents, that cheap meat from Australia, which Costco is the biggest importer of Australian meat, and all over the world, they bring it in from 8 countries. When it hits that point, you stop. They need to buy from Americans and keep that price up there. And that's our trade. That's the Department of Commerce, and you're absolutely right.
They're
that's
putting
where the
American
government
growers last.
Absolutely. That's where they're.
That's a blatant example.
Blatant example of it, and it can be done. It can so easily be done. They just don't enforce it.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, there's so much wisdom that comes from sitting down with somebody who's doing this every day. And, one of my dreams for the USDA is that we have a real farmer or rancher running it. And that the policies are coming from knowing all of the complexities that go into each cycle, each seasonal cycle, each growth cycle as it relates to the herd population And it's because currently where all these regulations are coming from are from these representatives who are the loudest, not necessarily the representatives that are the most experienced in terms of actual lived experience. And the lived experience has to be outside of the science as well. It has to make economic sense. Mm-hmm. So there's a balance that all the time needs to be struck, and currently we don't have that kind of thoughtful leadership in this country. And we haven't for a long time.
We have a lot of political science.
A lot of political science. There's a lot of economists.
A lot of paid science.
There's a lot of these kids that, I was talking to this philanthropist, and we were talking about regenerative agriculture, and I was like, just put all your money into agriculture. Like, if you care about climate, put all of your money right now as a philanthropist into land management, stewardship, soil, and like full food systems, to make sure that like the stewards are well supported, and that there's real businesses that go into the food supply chain that are thinking about climate. That's all you, and her response to me was, I think I should start an advocacy group. Just young people, will just pay them to do climate advocacy. That was her response. And I'm just like, that's just going to create more noise, more chaos, more misinformation. And you're going to stifle the people who can apply their talents and wisdom to working with the land. And when I say stifle, I feel like that's an understatement. Soul crushing.
Well, we're excited.
Yeah.
We started 3 years ago now, putting spraying algae on our lands, and seeing the difference. And it's taken, every year it gets a little better, but we're seeing that difference. That takes money. It takes, and it's just, and we're sharing, our customers are catching on, and they're starting to spray. And
spray algae.
Yeah, to regenerate the soil.
That's
just
so
for the
cool.
soil. It's amazing stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, so
it's
exciting.
Natural.
Yeah, totally natural, totally healthy, and feeding the ground instead of fertilizing it with the
chemical fertilizer.
All of that. So, but so there's so many good things that the ranchers are trying to do, and the farmers. We're more on them, obviously, on the ranching end of it. So all we have is hay that we put up for our cows, but we're doing that. And the narrative out there of ranchers do not hate the land. Ranchers do not, are not out there. There's so many of us that are out there just trying to do good things and feed the ground again and turn this whole huge machine in another direction. It just takes time. It takes money.
Yeah.
And
it takes political will.
It does. And I would just say, Bobby Kennedy, he is just breathing some hope for the future on all of this, and giving a different air, a different energy to, oh my goodness, maybe something good is going to happen down the road instead of all of this doomsday. Yeah. It's all bad. The climate's burning up. The world's going to blow up. No matter what, we're screwed. And
meanwhile, buy our fake meat.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, buy our fake meat.
Yeah.
And I don't know. There's something going on. There is a different energy about him and you. Just getting to sit down and meet you and go, there's some better answers here, and something better for this next generation coming up. And
I really appreciate that, because even just sitting here with you both has changed I learned something. I have thought I understood regenerative ranching. I thought I understood the methane cycles of feedlots, but you're right. There are these nuances, and to assume that somebody who roughly understands the principles of regenerative agriculture could understand the science of these connection points in the supply chain of taking cattle to market. Like, I'm no expert. You are an expert. And that's where it's so important for people to remain open-minded and listen to each other in these moments, because it's the only way we're going to be able to get over these truly uninformed biases.
Oh, that's so true.
That's that's such a breath of fresh air as we're out here, isn't it? And I can't even say it.
I know.
You guys are the first, in my adult life since I was paying attention, the first presidential candidates, to take any political candidate, that hasn't come out and said, I've got a program for that. I've got a plan for that. I've got this for that. I've got this. We got it all figured out. Sign here, send in your maximum, I think it's $6,600 this year. Send it in, give us your support, we'll take care of it. And that's what we've lived with for 40 years. And this whole conversation is about what we've lived with for the last longer than that. And you guys have come out and said, we need to visit, we need to talk, we need to learn, we got to figure something out besides what's been going on. And that, for us, like I said, being major Trump supporters, working with his secretaries, going, hey, wait a minute. This guy's saying something I thought would never come out of a Democrat's mouth. He's, and you're the same way. So there's hope. I mean, we're
not Democrats anymore. That party's been corrupted and twisted inside out by lab rat loving people. But I think, there's a lot of liberals, right, that can objectively say what's going on right now doesn't make sense. This is making people sick. This is not, to the principles and the ethos of progressive thought at all. It's actually quite the opposite. It's the corruption of systems for strictly corporate interests. So the idea that we can't feed people healthy food in this country because of our government policies, because of the kleptocracy that has been made of our agencies, there's nothing about that that's liberal or progressive.
No, that's completely the opposite.
It's the opposite. That poor people should be eating processed foods. I mean, that is the complete opposite of the progressive ethos. So whatever's happened to the Democratic Party, it's definitely not being guided by the principles that established the party. To call yourself a Democrat in 2024 is to call yourself someone who's either been completely manipulated by corporate capture or an elite who's benefiting from corporate capture. That's all that's left in that party, in my opinion.
We had just on that note, I talked to our nephew yesterday, told him we were coming down to talk to you and stuff, and how excited, gosh, we're just talking, we're conversing with this. And he's like, yeah, he goes, I am so happy right now. He goes, I have been so angry for so many years, and I found out that the only reason I was angry is the news I was listening to told me to be angry. Yeah. So I was angry. And he goes, I realized I don't have to be angry anymore. But, the media is directly involved in that. You need to hate yourself and hate your country and hate your neighbor and backtalk your mom because it's bad, and people just do that stuff. It's foolish.
The programming has been very strong. The programming that, you're either a Republican who, is just a Trump supporter, right? Or you're a Democrat who hates Trump. I mean, there's no winning in that narrative.
No. And I'm hoping a lot of people are just sick of it and want to get healthy and want to start working together. And people will put their pistols down and stop going. Are you Democrat or are you Republican? It's like, who cares? Let's start working together. Let's start coming up with some better solutions. Yeah. And instead of pegging each other of what you are, what you were, and I'm hoping that people are wanting to get on a better page. And you guys have been so good about.
Oh yeah, my hat's off for. We will not get into the name calling and all the mudslinging,
Mockery
and I definitely think that's how you win over more people. I definitely think you. I mean, you bring the saturated fat thing up, you win people over because that has devastated the ranching economy, the animal. I mean, and not just ranching. You know, you've got chickens, hogs, and beef, dairy.
Yeah.
That has wiped those 4 industries out for the last 40 years. You speak about that. The people who are on the fence are going, hey, wait a minute, they're talking about me now.
Save metabolic health. Eat American-grown beef.
Yeah, absolutely. And every time he gets on there and says, hey, the same corrupt system that is after me and censored me and coming down on my throat is doing the exact same thing to President Trump. Every compliment you guys say that way, which is really, he loves to fight. He's a puncher, and you diffuse that immediately. He doesn't even know how to swing at you when you're saying we're all being manipulated and this government is terrible, and then you beat him on the issues. Because if he can't hit you and call you a name, I don't even think he'll know what to do.
Right.
And you guys are so good at the issues. I mean, when you get in a debate, and another thing too, I would think, you guys need to stop asking permission to be on a debate stage. Biden is never going to let you on that. You got a couple people that really like you, and you know this more than me, but Tucker Carlson would have you and Trump on as a debate. Yeah. Newsmax would have you two on as a debate, and the election's about you two at this point. And I would just go get that thing set up the best you can and have it with him.
Yeah. And you know, we hit 270 electoral votes last week.
Last week?
Last week.
He thought it was going to be mid-July.
No,
so
last week we got it.
Oh, wow.
It's huge. I was like, I can't believe it.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
So it's we're ahead of schedule on ballot access. They've made it incredibly hard. But I think the will is there. And, you know, you make a really good point that if we just stick to the issues, get away from this like false victimhood, because that's not very helpful either. That doesn't help anybody.
No.
Like, yeah, they're making it hard for us, but we're not victims. We're still working our asses off, and we're getting on each and every ballot in this country. And it is a blessing in disguise, because each time we have to go out there and collect signatures, we're connecting.
Yeah, you're talking to people.
And we're learning. And we're getting into the nuance and the details of things that I will tell you, I don't think a presidential ticket has explored at this level of detail.
I don't think so.
No.
In a really long time.
Ever.